Welcome to our latest whiteboard-style explainer. Today we're diving into a massive 1,200-year journey through history. We've got our virtual markers ready, our animated stick figures are all set, and we're going to draw out the incredibly epic, chaotic, and just totally fascinating story of the Roman Empire. We're covering the whole shebang, from its mythical beginnings all the way to its legendary collapse.
I mean, it really is the ultimate question, right? How exactly does a chaotic little camp of runaways and outcasts eventually evolve to completely conquer 10% of humanity, only to completely lose it all? Well, we're going to break down these huge transformations of power. We'll map out exactly how Rome climbed to the absolute top of the world and what ultimately cracked its foundations.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our chronological roadmap, so you know exactly where we're heading today. First, we'll hit from myth to kingdom, then the rise of the Republic, followed by the first emperor takes control. After that, we'll look at the Roman Golden Age, and finally wrap up with the fall of the West. Starting with Section 1, from myth to kingdom. According to legend, the epic story of Rome kicks off with a pretty wild mix: a miracle, a really treacherous uncle, and, famously, a female wolf.
The story actually starts near modern Rome, where a Vestal virgin named Sylvia gave birth to twins, Romulus and Remus. Their uncle, Aemilius, ordered them to be thrown into the river. But as the myth goes, they were saved by a wolf and raised by a shepherd. Fast forward a bit, they grow up, overthrow their wicked uncle, and then, well, they get into a violent argument over where to build their own city. This ends with Romulus killing Remus. To actually populate his newly claimed camp, Romulus essentially declared it an asylum city. Naturally, it quickly filled up with runaway slaves, debt dodgers, exiles, and criminals. But there was a glaring issue. There were virtually no women. To solve this dire gender imbalance, they came up with a pretty extreme plan. They hosted a festival, invited their neighbors, the Sabines, and right in the middle of the party, kidnapped the Sabine women. After a brief war, everyone kind of figured it out and merged into one unified people.
Moving right along to Section 2, Rise of the Republic. This is the era of Rome without kings.
So Rome initially cycled through 7 kings, but the 7th one was so notoriously cruel that they eventually rebelled. They kicked him out and set up a republic led by 2 elected consuls who could actually veto each other. But you know, the republic's path wasn't exactly smooth. Early on, they suffered this devastating humiliation when the Gauls invaded, looted, and burned Rome, demanding a massive ransom in gold. And this trauma really birthed what we could call Rome's villain arc. They adopted this ultra-militaristic mindset, basically vowing to never, ever be humiliated again. Driven by pure vengeance and a deep need for security, they started aggressively conquering every neighboring tribe and city in Italy.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is Rome's ultimate test, the 3 blockbuster Punic Wars against Carthage, which was a massive naval superpower in North Africa. In the first war, Rome literally didn't have a navy. So what do? They steal Carthaginian ship designs, reverse engineer them, and somehow win an island. In the second war, Carthage's brilliant general, Hannibal, marches elephants over the Alps and wrecks Rome for years. But Rome's sheer stubbornness kept them in the fight until they sweated out and won. By the Third War, Rome decided they couldn't even tolerate Carthage existing as a rival. They literally deleted the entire city and enslaved the population. With their only real rival out of the picture, Rome became completely addicted to endless expansion.
And that addiction brings us to Section 3, the first emperor takes control. The chaotic transition from Caesar to Augustus. The ultimate final boss of the Republic's expansion era was, of course, Julius Caesar. He conquered Gaul, won over the public with huge tax cuts, introduced a 365-day calendar, and regulated grain. Then, he crosses back into Rome with his army and just starts collecting political offices like trading cards. He even declares himself dictator for life. Well, the Senate was understandably paranoid. Desperate to save the Republic, they assassinated him in 44 BC, stabbing him 23 times. But honestly, this backfired spectacularly. It sparked a massive civil war. Caesar's 18-year-old adopted heir, Octavian, stepped up, ruthlessly outmaneuvered his rivals, and ultimately defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Having scooped up absolute power, Octavian was crowned Augustus in 27 BC. Just like that, the Republic was dead, and the empire was born.
Which perfectly sets up Section 4, the Roman Golden Age, a time when stability took precedence over glory.
So, the crucial point here is that Augustus realized all this endless expansion and civil war would eventually destroy Rome completely. He prioritized permanent stability. And his big fix? Reforming the military. You see, during the Republic, armies were basically temporary.
Soldiers fought for individual generals who promised them land and loot. Augustus changed the game. He transformed this into the Empire Army, a professional standing force. Soldiers now enlisted for 20 years, they were paid directly by the state, and they got guaranteed retirement packages from the government. Suddenly, a soldier's loyalty flowed upward directly to Rome itself, instead of just to some rogue general.
But you know, Rome's borders were still pretty volatile. In 9 AD, Rome got a terrifying reality check up in Germania. The Roman general Varus marched 3 legions deep into Germanic territory. He felt totally safe because he was reassured by Arminius, a Germanic leader who had actually served in the Roman military and earned Varus's trust. But Arminius was just playing the perfect ally. Secretly, he was leading the Romans right into a meticulously planned ambush in the Teutoburg Forest.
The conditions out there were an absolute nightmare for Rome. Roman military strategy relied heavily on tight formations on flat open ground. But in these dense, muddy forests pouring with rain, the Romans got strung out into this huge, clumsy conga line with wagons and civilians. Arminius knew exactly how to strip Rome of all its tactical advantages. Germanic fighters just struck from the trees, disappearing and reappearing like ghosts. Over several days, the Roman army just collapsed. 20,000 highly trained professional career soldiers were systematically dismantled in the mud.
The trauma of the Teutoburg Forest forever altered Rome's trajectory. Augustus finally realized that continuously expanding into hostile, decentralized territories was a fatal trap. As this quote perfectly sums it up, Rome stops pushing outward and commits fully to defense. Augustus permanently abandoned the whole dream of conquering Germania. Instead, he turned the Rhine and Danube rivers into hardened, militarized frontiers. And for centuries, this defensive posture really defined the golden era of the Roman Empire.
However, stability is a fragile thing, right? Let's fast forward past Emperor Tiberius and the rising influence of the elite Praetorian Guard right into the year 69 AD. Known as the Year of the Four Emperors, this was a chaotic 12-month stretch where 4 different generals claimed the throne, pretty much just because their respective armies backed them. It brutally proved a stark new reality. Political legitimacy didn't really matter anymore. If you controlled the military, you controlled Rome.
And this fatal flaw leads us right into our final act, Section 5, The Fall of the West. By the 3rd century, Rome was practically buckling under its own immense weight. We're talking simultaneous invasions, massive plagues, and hyperinflation. The army was even assassinating emperors, sometimes replacing them weekly. So to save the collapsing system, Emperor Diocletian introduced something called the Tetrarchy. Basically, he chopped the massive empire into distinct administrative pieces ruled by 4 emperors who were stationed out at border cities rather than in Rome. Rome itself was practically abandoned as the center of power. Eventually, this whole system devolved into a massive battle royale, which was won by Constantine. Seeing that the true wealth and stability were actually in the east, Constantine shifted focus entirely and founded the new Christian capital of Constantinople in 330 AD. But while the east was thriving, the west was dealing with an unprecedented logistical nightmare: mass migration. In the late 4th century, the fearsome Huns exploded out of the Eurasian steppe, pushing the Goths completely off their lands. Tens of thousands of Goths showed up at Rome's Danube borders seeking asylum. Rome officially let them in, but deeply corrupt Roman officials brutally exploited and literally starved these refugees. Pushed right to the brink, the Goths revolted. In 378 AD at Adrianople, they completely destroyed a Roman army and actually killed the emperor right on the battlefield. And this brilliantly illustrates the fatal cycle that completely gutted the Western Empire. Because Rome couldn't militarily defeat these migrating groups anymore, they were forced to make desperate deals. They started giving up chunks of land to armed groups just in exchange for temporary peace. The Vandals swept in and took North Africa. And this was a devastating blow because North Africa provided the grain and the wealth that the West desperately needed. Think about it. Losing Africa meant losing taxes. Losing taxes meant Rome couldn't pay its professional soldiers. And without soldiers, well, they just lost more land. The cycle of collapse became totally irreversible. After that, the late-stage disasters hit in rapid succession. In 395 AD, the empire permanently split into east and west. By 410 AD, things had deteriorated so much that the Visigoths easily sacked the city of Rome itself. And finally, in 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire ended, but not with some massive cinematic battle. It ended with a quiet whimper. A Germanic commander basically just politely deposed the last, powerless Western emperor. Ironically, that final emperor was named Romulus Augustus, literally sharing names with both the mythological founder of Rome and its very first emperor. You can't make that up. But before we wipe this whiteboard clean, I want to leave you with one final provocative question.
Is the Roman Empire really dead in 476 AD if the Eastern, Byzantine half survived for another 1,000 years? I mean, while the West was collapsing into scattered kingdoms, the East, speaking Greek but still fiercely calling themselves Romans, fought on against Persians, Arabs, and Crusaders right up until the fall of Constantinople in 1453. It completely changes how you view the timeline of human history, doesn't it? Thanks for learning with me today in this explainer, and definitely keep exploring the past.